But if people start saying we want less of this, or this is not worth it, or I'm not going back there because, then we are undoing the work that others have been building up.
This is Keys to the Shop, episode 523, an encore episode of How We Ruin the Specialty Coffee Experience. Well, hey everybody, and welcome to another episode of Keys to the Shop, where we give you insights, inspiration, and the tools you need to grow as a coffee service professional. My name is Chris DiFirio. I am your host for the show and have been for 8 years now of Keys to the Shop. We never really put a big post up about that when it came time. It was January 4th, 3rd, something like that, when we hit 8 years of Keys to the Shop. So anyhow, I bring it up because you get a lot of episodes in 8 years. Best way to stay updated with these episodes is to stay subscribed to the show. So in order to do that, all you need to do is hit subscribe wherever you are listening to this podcast right now. And that'll be it, whether that's on YouTube, Spotify, Overcast, or Apple Podcasts, wherever that is. And also, it would be great if you love this show and you want to spread the word about Keys to the Shop to literally every coffee bar in the world, which is the dream. Yeah, not really. I mean, it'd be cool, but that's impossible. Anyway, we can try. It happens with you if you share the show and let owners across the world know about Keys to the Shop and the resources that we bring on a weekly basis, multiple times a week, to help your coffee shop and coffee shops in general thrive. So I want to let you all know that we are in the midst of accepting applications for membership into the key holder coaching groups. I host each of these groups. They happen over the course of 6 months. Each meeting is 2 hours of focused time where 5 to 6 coffee shop owners like yourself get together and help each other succeed through encouragement, accountability, insights, problem solving, sharing of resources. It's magical. And this is the 4th time that we're doing it. In 2025, we're going to start up in March, and I'm accepting applications throughout February. But I would get your application in so we can start putting you into the list of interested people. And you and I will get to have a conversation. We'll talk about your business, your goals, and all that fun stuff. So click on the link in the show notes you'll see for key holder coaching groups, or you could just DM me or reach out, chris@keystotheshop.com. But being a part of these cohorts over the course of 6 months with fellow coffee shop owners is for coffee shop owners who've been doing this for at least 2 years. You are owner of a brick and mortar retail coffee store. You might be a coffee shop / roastery, but this is how we're focusing our energies. And these past groups have been great. So testimonials will be posted on Instagram coming up later this month. So keep an eye out for that. But I'll keep an eye out for your application. Again, chris@keystotheshop.com. Now, today, our episode is brought to you by a couple of amazing sponsors. First, arto.com. That is Arto Brick on Instagram. They are about hard surfaces, tiles, and stonework for your business, for your coffee shop, handmade in Los Angeles, California. Armin was a past guest on the show. It's a wonderful company. And also the Pacific Barista series, plant-based beverages designed for baristas to perform on the bar the way you just dream that they will. And we're going to talk more about both of these companies later in today's episode. But I want to just introduce you to the topic of this episode first. It is an encore episode, and sometimes we re-air episodes from the distant past. I forget what this was. It was like episode 84 of the show, and we're on to episode 523. So sometimes when we bring these episodes back, it helps those of you who have been with us a long time remember what we talked about. But this is one of those episodes that used to also be a Coffee Fest presentation, and it's called How We Ruin the Specialty Coffee Experience. And what I want to set up for you here before we kind of air the actual episode content from way back in the day is that not a whole lot has changed. Now, some has, in terms of what we're going to talk about in this episode, the gist of this is that we hold in our hands, you have the keys to the shop, literally, right? You have the keys to unlock enjoyment. You can create an on-ramp, or you can be a roadblock based on your attitude, based on your business practices. There's a lot of downstream consequences from our actions. And if we're not students of our actions and the wake we leave behind us as we act, then we're not going to get the results that we want, and neither will the customer. And today, we're talking a lot about, I talked to a reporter today, actually. I'm not sure if they'll use my quote from the Washington Post, but we talked about the coffee crisis right now for retailers, the price hike, how it's a crisis for people who are trying to stay afloat. And one of the things I mentioned was, hey, yes, prices are going up. And it doesn't look like it's slowing down. You see posts all over the place. Coffee shops their Canva accounts have been upgraded from, free to pro pretty quickly to get those posts up on Instagram talking about how they're raising their prices. There's inflation, there's tariffs, there's all sorts of things that are happening. The price of green coffee is going up. And so what do? Well, you control what you can control. Yes, you might need to raise your prices, but also you have to raise the level of delivery of value to the customer, the value you offer the customer, the experience, the level of hospitality and quality and consistency, the training. Get leaning into the craft of the experience you offer people, and you will see people being willing to pay more for coffee. They expect a lot from a place that does so much marketing. Every coffee bar does a lot of marketing, but then we don't do a lot of delivery of the promises that people have in their head. Just think about the fact that you have the friend who says, you have to see this movie. It's the best movie. It won awards. It is some of the best acting you'll ever see in your life. The special effects are amazing, and it made me cry 17 times. You gotta go. Now, if you wait about 2 weeks and you keep hearing about this movie and then you go see it, you're probably not going to enjoy it as much as your friend did because they had the advantage of going in fresh. Now, people who have sometimes discovered coffee bars and been totally surprised by coffee, that's like your friend that just saw it fresh and just wowed by that movie. But a lot of people now, because of a saturated environment, have built up expectations, and we kind of did that. And now we're either walking them back or we're trying to fulfill them in the best way that we can. And I think that latter part is the best thing we can do. So that's why we're re-airing this episode, is because it's a very relevant conversation for the conversation that the industry is having right now. We need to invest into delivery of value for the amount of money that we're going to charge our customers. And we need them to be able to feel that we're doing that. They need to see, feel, and taste that that's what we're doing. We're not just asking for more money. We're also giving. So we're asking more for you, but we're giving more to you in return. So let's listen to this episode from way back in the past, but still relevant today, about how we ruin the specialty experience.
Now, today we are talking about ways to ruin the specialty coffee experience, and you've all been part of it. You've seen it happen at the hands of other people, and you have been the one to kind of ruin it. I know I have during my years. There's no way you can get very far as a barista without both making somebody's day and also kind of ruining their day for specialty coffee. Now, the trick is, I think, being able to minimize our negative impact more and more as we go. So here's the thing, the kind of philosophy behind this. We're going to give some practical examples, but the philosophy behind this is really, we promise a specialty experience, and oftentimes we fall short because we build with marketing, we build with packaging, we promise notes and more notes, we charge higher prices than people are used to paying for coffee, and justifiably so. And then when people experience it, there's an expectation that oftentimes is not met. So let me start by saying this. People have been hurt by coffee in the past. They walk into our stores with a history. Oftentimes, they've gone to a larger specialty retailer or even an independent and had a bad drink or a bad service experience. Whatever it is, people tend, human nature, I think, just dictates that you tend to carry around with you more in the front of the mind the negative experiences you have rather than the ones that are positive. And so, unfair as it may be, we need to work really hard to make a great impression and also kind of embrace the fact that our industry is represented by this whole spectrum of different producers of specialty coffee at the retail level, and not all doing it well. And therefore, as different levels of skill and care speak for specialty coffee, it's kind of a grab bag of results. And we can't take it personally that people have built up an expectation of being disappointed. Well, what we can do is sort of own that and try to make up for it with the experience that we do give people. Now, what I think is helpful in terms of how you might think of this situation, in the shop there are lots of pieces of minutia that need to be put in place and kept in place by staff and leadership. They contribute to either a really great experience or they contribute to this lowered expectation. You can think of it as white noise, like an air conditioning unit that's always running. Like out back of one of the cafes I worked at in Sunnergoss Coffee, we had an air unit that would run and run and run. And if you're having a meeting out there, you learn to ignore it. It's just there. It's part of the experience. But then when it shuts off, people tend to pause, look around, and kind of comment on the fact that it just shut off and they just got used to it. This is sort of the way I view how a customer reacts to a well-curated and a well-cared-for coffee bar and coffee experience. When they walk in and they don't experience the kind of negative white noise that they're used to experiencing potentially from, like we talked about, maybe some bad experiences that they've had, to them it's the comment-worthy moment, whether internally or to you, that something is different about that place, even if it's not something they can articulate. That impact of absence, let's call it, is kind of what we're after. It's the same thing with coffee. So coffee is, if you've never had coffee before, coffee is bitter. And after a while, you learn to tune out the bitterness and pick up the signal over the noise. But it doesn't stop us from trying to minimize the bitterness and accentuate the sweetness. So what we're going to talk about today are some ways that we tend to accentuate the bitterness unnecessarily, and some ways that we can accentuate the sweetness of the experience of specialty so that we're not unintentionally ruining a specialty experience, but we're actually delivering on over and above what people expect. So there are a few factors at play here, and we're going to take them one by one. The first thing is how we view problems in the bar. So we need to identify the roadblocks, the contributing factors to these negative experiences. One of the first things that you can do is get a customer's point of view on your establishment. This was actually a point made by James Hoffman in one of his latest vlogs on YouTube about the London Coffee Festival, and his comment was essentially that the organizers should take a moment to try to experience the show in the way that the people who attend experience it. And the idea is that if they do that, that might inspire change in the way that it's formatted. Maybe it could be longer or more accessible, whatever. But it's true that if you're in a position of leadership, if you're in a place where you can actually change something, then you need to be able to experience what it's like from the customer's point of view. James suggests that we order coffee from your website or order a coffee from your coffee bar and see how the experience is from the customer's point of view. So putting in place a mindset that is constantly looking at where you are in the organization and what you have within your scope of agency to change. What can you do? What actions can you take, whether it's your own actions or helping coach the actions of others to be able to accentuate the sweetness of this experience at your shop? An idea could be that you just ask customers too. Not only do you experience it yourself, but then ask some of your trusted regulars what they might change about the experience in your bar. That's a very vulnerable thing to do. I don't really hear many people do that. I've never really heard of anybody asking that kind of a question because no news is good news oftentimes when it comes to customer feedback. But the whole idea of something like this comes around to this common 360 review process that's really popular in corporate settings, where you get all of the people that you interact with to comment on, anonymously actually, to give you feedback that will help you become a better professional. But if you're not getting feedback from your baristas, if you're not getting feedback from your customers about the experience on a somewhat regular basis, then there's no way for you to know for sure whether or not you're kind of perpetuating this negative experience unbeknownst to you because you haven't really investigated it. So that's the kind of mindset we need to go into this with. We want to be able to cut problems off at the pass and not let them kind of metastasize under our noses until they become really big problems. So start getting in the habit of addressing on a regular basis these types of things in your cafe. So let's go over some ideas for ways that we tend to kind of contribute to the negative experience in a cafe of our service or our quality. One of the things that we generally tend to find is that when you become more familiar with your surroundings as a barista, you start kind of getting comfortable. And when you get comfortable, everything kind of starts turning into the inward culture behind the bar. And there's this slow slide into an us versus them mentality where, it's a matter of trying to defend your cafe culture, your staff culture rather, against the interruption of the customer coming up to the register. There's always this need to kind of counterbalance this pull to that side of the counter. So knowing that this is a real kind of pull to the other side of the bar where we kind of build this wall of separation between us and the customer, I'm going to talk about some practical things that we need to be able to employ in order to make sure that we are not unintentionally ruining a specialty coffee experience for somebody and that we're paying mind to the nuances that make up collectively this good experience for a customer so they can feel the impact of the absence of these roadblocks to their enjoyment. One of the first things that we can do is make sure that we look like we're actually ready to serve somebody. That's an issue of how we carry ourselves behind the bar. We're not talking about, standing at attention and things like that, but there are definitely things that indicate to a customer that you are disinterested in this process. That means things like having your hands in your pockets, leaning up against a refrigerator, sprawling yourself out on the counter, stretching and all this other stuff. Carry ourselves in a way that just looks like, we don't want to be here. And that may be true. Maybe you don't want to be there. And it's kind of not the point of what I'm saying. The point of what I'm saying is that know that your messaging to the customer is that what they're about to purchase is not worth you paying attention to. So why should they pay attention to it? That's what the message sends. So kind of being careful that our posture is one that looks like we're actually paying attention to our work and we're paying attention to the cafe. When the open sign is on, are we open? Are we able to serve the needs of the space if we're not aware of them? And will people trust us with their experience if we look like we're just halfway between sleep and wakefulness? That's the first thing. Conversations are another one. So being able to keep our conversations lower in tone and also being able to cut off our conversations immediately. This is just an understanding that you should have with your coworkers that, hey, if a customer comes in, we are going to greet them and I'm going to stop talking to you like immediately. What happens when this doesn't get talked about is that people carry on their conversations in front of the customer and they wait until their conversation winds down. And the customer's just thinking like, what? Where am I? Am I like ordering at the wrong counter? You kind of create the situation where they're made to feel that they're interrupting you. And oftentimes you'll feel like they're interrupting you because you've allowed yourself to get so entangled in this conversation that you give off this vibe that, man, I really didn't want to have to serve you this coffee, or I didn't want to have to interrupt that conversation. So again, we need to kind of counterbalance ourselves against that inevitable pull. So conversations behind the bar, make sure that first you're not forcing the entire cafe to have to listen to you talk to your coworkers. You also want to cut off those conversations before they becomes a situation where people feel out of place and that they're inconveniencing you for just coming into the coffee bar. A couple other things here. Eating behind the bar, it might not be a big deal to have something in a designated employee area, but discretion is the key here. Having to finish your mouthful of food while you're addressing a customer, it's just strange. There are so many different policies that cafes have. Even if it's okay for you to eat a full meal in front of a customer, just know that it doesn't matter how confident you are and how within the rules you're playing. A customer doesn't necessarily view it more positively because it's allowed behind the bar. So just know that the impact of that is kind of a gross out factor. This is just my opinion, of course, and I'm sure this might be maybe a little contentious, but there's discrete ways of going about these things. In some cases, the health department would just have your butt for doing that. So just know the law, but also know the impact of that on the cafe and the messaging that you're putting out there.
Well, hey everyone, it's Chris again, and I want to take a break here to talk about our sponsors. First, we have Arto Brick. Armin is amazing. He is the leader, along with his brother Vod, of a company founded by his father. And this is a company that produces tile, stonework, hard surfaces for anything from pools to kitchens to living rooms to, of course, coffee shops, right? The hard surfaces in your space, the stonework, it is something that really literally grounds your business in a feeling that is not something you can really, a picture doesn't do it justice. You have to feel the texture. You have to be standing on the tile and delivering something unique and beautiful to you in the form of tile and stonework and hard surfaces is what Armin and his brother Vod at Arto Brick are all about. So go to their website, arto.com, or better yet, say hello to Armin. Say, hi, Armin. I heard about you on Keys to the Shop. I would love to talk about, using your product in my coffee shop, in my coffee shops. Do that by DMing them on Instagram at Arto Brick. Okay, now let's talk about soy milk and almond milk and oat and all the other milks, right? The alternatives, or better said, the plant-based milks, right? These are the things that customers are ordering like crazy. And gotta tell you, you got to choose the best because customers are trying lots of different kinds. But one of the originals is the Pacific Barista series, and they still are one of those companies that remains a leader for a reason. This product stands up to the heat from steaming, produces amazing texture for latte art, and also creates balance in the cup so that the flavor is always focused on the coffee. So if you go to pacificfoodservice.com, you're going to see all of the different options. Get some samples. Try it for yourself, and you'll see what I'm talking about. If you're looking for the best plant-based beverages, you should really try the Barista series from Pacific. So let's get right back to our Encore episode.
Phone use behind the bar. Being on your phone, like if you're allowed to be on your phone behind the bar, you can be discreet about it. But if you're sitting there texting, like eyeballs to screen, and or just in an obvious way, again, it's this, you're not ready to serve. You're not in a place where you're going to be attentive to the needs of the customer, and they're going to feel like they're interrupting you. It just sends the wrong message. And we need to represent specialty coffee as best as we can. There's a lot at stake in the retail environment. And when we start allowing ourselves to kind of slide in the direction of sort of turning the coffee bar into our personal living room, then we're not going to be representing the supply chain, the hard work that went into that coffee as best we can. We're just giving ourselves these little outs. So dial it back, prune it back, make sure that you're aware of yourself behind the bar. Personally, I just don't like the idea of having cell phone use behind the bar. That's just my thought on it. But even if you're allowed to have your cell phone out or text behind the bar, maybe you have a system of communication that everybody has to use. There should be a discreet way of going about it that everyone's aware of. Managers, just make sure that you communicate the proper way to go about texting and receiving texts that are work appropriate in the workplace. These are little things, but they really do. They build up. So behind the bar, we just need to do what we can to be attentive, have a posture of service, be open for business ourselves when the business is open, and watch out that we are not just first serving the needs of our internal staff culture before we're serving the needs of the customers out there, and they're not feeling like they're inconveniencing us or interrupting something private going on behind the bar. Now, in terms of how we care for the cafe, one of the main things that we kind of lack in is the ability to make sure that the environment the guest is interacting with is actually cared for well. Part of this has to do with cafe blindness, where you just get used to the idea that there's clutter in that corner and it doesn't bother you. But for a customer, it might be a really big deal. And we've got other fish to fry. We've got a cafe to open, and people were waiting outside the door before the lights came on. So we're not really thinking about that. And by the end of the shift, we just want to go. And when you're a manager, you may be behind on your scheduling. There may be an order that went wrong. Somebody called in sick. There's a number of things that each person who occupies a role in the cafe can say, well, we saw that, but we didn't do anything about it. And when you've got dozens of people noticing things, but then sort of stuffing it in the back burner, we're talking about a lot of little points of potential customer annoyance that builds up that kind of negative white noise that we were talking about that generally is part of the cafe. This means stuff like wobbly tables, sticky tabletops, condiment bars that are perpetually out of cream or sugar, broken pieces of furniture, a spill that hasn't been cleaned up in hours, bussing of tables that hasn't taken place because nobody's gone out into the cafe for a while. These are things where now the customer has to start kind of punching in as an employee and helping you bus tables, starting to fold up napkins and level your tables for you. They're not on the payroll. They're supposed to be enjoying themselves, and we're supposed to be serving them. But here they are now really having to work to enjoy themselves, not to spill their latte. How many of you have had somebody ask for a damp rag to clean the tabletop? That's really embarrassing. It's embarrassing because we should have known. We should have known. Somebody should have been out there. Or a pile of dishes appears on the counter because they weren't bussed, and it was just from a customer who came in and wanted a table. That, again, is something that we should take note of and say, here's a problem that we need to solve before it becomes a bigger one. If it's staffing, okay, let's look at that. Or what is the SOP for cafe checks? When you go out into the cafe, how often do you do that? Take 2 minutes to scan the cafe with your eyes, go grab a bunch of dishes and run them back. Just takes a few minutes. There's little things that you can do when you follow through on the observations that are made. And if you build a culture in your cafe where observations of these things are taken seriously and actually written down, stored, and reviewed, it's more likely that you're going to take care of them and not let them sort of begin to work their way into just what's expected in the cafe. If your cafe environment is just good enough, you want your cafe to be a 90-point coffee and it's actually just an 80 or a 79-point coffee. So you're serving these great coffees, but you're serving it in an environment like your cafe is a vessel that's just dirty. Great coffee in a dirty cup. So kind of strange, and we do have the ability to do a better job on that. It's just kind of a bear to tackle, especially when it builds up. So you don't want to let it build up. Stay on top of it. That means things like the bathrooms too. I would encourage you to read the bathroom chapter of Colin Harmon's book, What I Know About Running Coffee Shops. This is something that I've been saying for a while also, which is when customers come to your coffee bar and you have a dirty bathroom, it basically ruins the whole experience. It really does. When you feel uncomfortable or unsafe, then you feel like like what else is this contaminated in this cafe? Everything is great, but this bathroom is awful. It pretty much makes the whole thing awful. Staying on top of those areas that the guest interacts with, it brings us right back to the beginning of this talk we're having, which is we need to put ourselves in the customer's shoes. We need to be able to experience our cafes the way that they do and then take action. So this brings us to the next thing. So leadership. Leadership in the cafe is another aspect where we tend to drop the ball. And it's not so much in the sense of inspiring baristas and things like that, although that is certainly a factor. What I want to communicate about this is management and leadership, maybe because they are strapped for time or energy, tend to under-communicate and under-equip staff to perform at an optimum level. You don't have the equipment you need to do the job well. You don't have the information to sell the thing that you're supposed to sell. This is something that lands purely in the lap of leadership. And communication is one of the main jobs that leadership has in the cafe, equipping and communicating for success. So when leadership drops the ball in that way, it trickles down into the guest experience in the coffee bar when they ask about a particular origin and they're met with blank stares. Now, there's some times where you do teach a barista something and they forget it. But I find that oftentimes this is more to do with sort of a misguided notion that everybody should be self-directed and find the information for themselves. No. Leadership and management, your job is to actually tell people things and follow up with them to make sure they absorb the information and learn it and teach them. Not just give them books and things to say, hey, go read this. It's more about coaching. It's more about being alongside them. And this is one of the things that really gives birth to a lot of the stuff that we've been talking about here. The underlying idea here of providing a specialty experience, serving specialty coffee, means we've got to know as leaders what we are planting. What are we planting? This is key for planting coffee. If you don't know what you're planting, you can't care for the land well. You can't really bring the tree to maturation properly. You won't know how to process it as well. Counterculture Coffee is just talking about advances that they're making in being able to test the DNA of trees so that farmers can know how best to care for plants that they've just assumed were one type when they're actually another. So as leaders, if you're planting seeds and you don't know what you're planting, then you will not know the fruit until it's too late. And you can't just close your eyes and cross your fingers. You've got to know, am I communicating well? Am I equipping well? What would it be like for the baristas to carry out the directive that I'm actually giving them to do? What are the tools that they need? I mean, this goes back to our SOPs episode. I would highly encourage you to listen to that episode where we talk about how to write SOPs and establish these procedures in your cafe. But one of the main ways that we tend to ruin specialty coffee experiences is we tend to under-communicate as leaders and under-equip for success. So if you're a manager, if you're a head barista, a head trainer, if you're anywhere above a barista in your role, you have a responsibility to plant well, tend well, and see the harvest of that in the interactions that people have in the cafe. And a lot of the things that we talked about, they'll be cut off at the pass before they even start. Finally, I want to talk about quality. So specialty coffee quality is one of the main things we hang our hats on. The quality of our coffee is paramount, but it's the consistency of that quality that actually creates trust and it creates an experience that people can embrace. So first of all, with quality, one of the things that we tend to do is just we don't taste things enough. We don't dial in our batch brews enough. We don't dial in the espresso enough. There is a sense in which if it meets a particular set of numerical standards that it's good enough. It's going to go out. It's going to go out. I'm going to go and get this drink done. It may be tasting a little bit bitter, but it's a caramel latte, so it doesn't really matter. There are lots of things that we give ourselves an out for when it comes to quality. And to the degree that we allow ourselves to serve drinks that are under standard is the degree to which we will slide into sort of a less than specialty representation of specialty coffee. So we've all done it. We all have done it. And every day is a test. Every drink that we make is a test. And sometimes we fail. Sometimes we succeed. But the less we fail, the more we hold ourselves accountable to put drinks out that we know are good and don't put drinks out that you know are bad or less than great. That is paving the way for success in the industry. I really firmly believe that quality of coffee and the quality of a coffee service experience is, I think, a rudder that turns this ship of the specialty industry, creates demand. We want more of this coffee. We want more of this experience. And if people start saying that, then we increase demand. We can increase prices. We build. But if people start saying we want less of this, or this is not worth it, or I'm not going back there because, then we are undoing the work that others have been building up. It kind of makes me think about what if, these are coffee shops. One is increasing customers' perception of specialty coffee. And then on the other side of the country, somebody is undoing that work. Are we not going to make a net gain here? The more we're on the same page of increasing our standards. Like I like Onyx Coffee Labs, never settle for good enough. Always kind of increasing your awareness of what specialty can be and increasing your skills in your presentation of it. That's where we want to be. So know your benchmarks, know the taste profiles of the benchmarks of your taste profiles. Build a way to keep yourselves accountable to quality on the bar. Part of this is cleaning during the shift, backflushing often. You can backflush with water every hour if you want. You can backflush with soap. You can backflush with Cafiza and be really thorough after a rush and start from a fresh group head. There are lots of ways that you can maintain the quality of your coffee throughout the shift, but out of self-preservation and just sheer pushing through the line, we tend to let quality slip. And we talked in our last episode about how a rush is so critical to establishing who you are as a business and what specialty coffee is as a concept, because that's when the most people are in your store, and therefore it has the biggest impact to make. So if your quality is off, if your quality is only at its best when you're at your slowest, then what we're doing is we're trying to run this race with a parachute tied to our backs. So minimize the drag, increase our accountability during the rush, increase our accountability to check in on the flavors and the benchmarks of what we're putting out there, and make sure that we're keeping things clean, orderly, and just presentable. That is going to minimize the negative experience that customers have when they come in. So how we are behind the bar, how the cafe is in terms of how the customer experiences it, what leadership is doing to make sure that things are communicated well, make sure that people are prepared and equipped, and what kind of quality are we putting out, and what kind of checks and balances do we have to make sure that we're putting out specialty level drinks at every moment. These are just some of the things that we can do to increase the sweetness of the experience and decrease the bitterness. It's one of the things that will help us not ruin the specialty experience. Because if we think that we are good enough, the neutral position of a coffee shop slides into apathy very, very quickly, and it devolves from there. It devolves and it turns into these factions of us versus them, and nobody likes to go to a shop like that for very long before they most of the time, go to another one where the coffee is cheaper and at least they don't feel like they're interrupting somebody. Or at least if they do, they're not paying as much money for it. So let's take these things and really ponder them. Think about how we are, what we do, what we can affect in terms of change in the positions that we occupy in the cafe. How can we create this impact of absence where customers come in and they feel that something is just different about this cafe? Things are just taken care of. I'm taken care of. The coffee is taken care of. The staff are being taken care of. This is a healthy and vibrant ecosystem in which specialty coffee can thrive. And if our cafes are increasingly representing coffee this way, and that's something we're working towards consciously, daily, then collectively, all the thousands and thousands of bars will make a huge impact in terms of how people perceive specialty coffee globally, and that will help create a great demand that will fuel the sustainability of our industry.
Okay, well, what did you think? Was it relevant to you right now? What do you see some of the things that we were talking about in this episode maybe happening in your cafe? Have you experienced it yourself as a customer? We have a past shift bait called Curbing Their Enthusiasm, where we do the similar things to what we talked about in how we're not really caretakers of the experience. We don't give people the room to experience it the way that they need to in order to grow into the kind of customers that are actually going to be lifelong supporters of specialty coffee. So the overarching theme here in how we ruin coffee is do the opposite to not ruin it and take care of it. Have you ever heard it's your competition to lose? Well, basically means you are a shoo-in. We have the equipment, we have the coffee, we got the people, we've got the passion. We can't just drop the ball right as we're getting there, right? It's what we do though sometimes because we get ahead of ourselves and we mess up our priorities. We allow things to creep in, but now is not the time to allow slack. Now is the time to really dial in the experience behind the bar, on the other side of bar, across the bar. with your finances, your operations, your quality control, everything, so that we deliver something amazing. We want to exceed people's expectations. And because of marketing and everything else, their expectations are actually pretty high. So it's good. We've got something to shoot for. Let's do it together and really make it a great specialty coffee experience for our customers. So if you have any questions or comments, feedback for me, go ahead and email chris@keystotheshop.com. Interested in being a member of our key holder coaching groups launching in March? We're accepting applications now. I'd love to have a conversation with you. If you're a coffee shop owner with some experience, running your shops over 2 years and you're looking for a community of support, encouragement, accountability, and just the kind of energizing that you don't really get when you're an owner because you're isolated in the daily grind, literally, of the business. That's one of the universal things that our members have said over the past year or so of running these groups is the camaraderie, the insights and the resources. Yes, of course, but that support in that community is really amazing. So go ahead and email chris@keystotheshop.com. And with that, I'm going to say goodbye. Thank you. It was a great time today. And I hope you go and make a wonderful specialty coffee experience for your customers. And I hope that today's episode has truly given you keys to the shop.